So let's
It
see
is
if
about time for the
we see
semifinals.
Dragons today.
Yeah. We've got Luis Scott-Vargas taking on Eric Froehlich. There's the matchup, play with pride, play with power. These guys tied at 6-3. Luis did win the tiebreaker game, so Eric had to win a quarterfinal in order to get into this matchup. But here they are, running it back.
Both had very, very impressive records.
Yeah, Luis won the regular season match. Luis also won the tiebreaker, so I don't know if he's got Efro's number. They get a look at Luis's stats. 5 Grand Prix wins, 5 Pro Tour top 8s. The runner-up in VSL last year. He's in the Hall of Fame. He's just one of the best players in the history of Magic, no doubt about it. Definitely in everybody's top 5. I mean, you could argue about how high in the top 5 of all time he is, but it's hard to argue that he's anywhere but top 5 all time.
Absolutely. Yeah, just a phenomenal player.
You're going to look at Eric's resume. We updated this slide multiple times during the year, and it's still out of date. He's got the 4th Pro Tour top 8. We got that on here. He's got the 13th Grand Prix top 8. We updated that, but that number 3 is now actually number 1 in Magic's top 25 rankings. And yeah, his resume, I mean, the season he's having has definitely got him right in the thick of Hall of Fame conversations for this coming year. Not currently a Hall of Famer. He will be on the ballot. There's definitely a lot of people who feel like that 4th Pro Tour top 8. And I mean, like I said, he damn near had a 5th one 2 weeks ago. Just on fire, number 1 ranked player in the world right now. So you got number 1 in the world right now versus one of the best of all time. Now, Dex, what are these guys up to?
All right. It looks like Efro is on Delver. Delver is, of course, one of my personal favorites. And it looks like Efro has Delver ready to go. And it looks like LSV is on... Well, he has some restricted cards and a Force of Will and a cantrip, so I don't know what he's on.
Yeah, I've seen the list, and I see Josh filled in there. He's on a Mentor deck, and it is a Monastery Mentor deck that sports 3 copies of Mystic Remora.
Oh, okay. In my testing, Remora matched up poorly against Delver because I played a lot of Mystic Remora in Vintage, and while it's really good against decks that are interested in throwing a bunch of spells onto the stack, not so much against decks that are interested in throwing out creatures. Is it a divination?
I think Luis is trying to smuggle a divination into his hand. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you can't play with multiple treasure cruises anymore, how else are you going to draw cards?
I think that the Mystic Remoras against Eric is kind of reasonable.
It depends on the sort of draw Eric has. The problem is that Delver of Secrets himself is a great foil to that.
Oh, I meant before he knew that it was Delver matchup. Just against Eric's deck A, whatever you think Eric's going to wind up putting in the A slot.
Oh, I think so. I think Mystic Remora is a card that I love, that is a great card. It just matches up really poorly against Delver. So there you see some of the value of Gitaxian Probe. By looking at LSV's hand, Eric knows that he probably doesn't need to run out that Red Elemental Blast or that Pyroblast on the very first turn, so he's free to deploy additional threats in the form of, well, Delvers.
Sure. Luis, though, digging, time-walking, trying to get onto a treasure cruise. He's closing in on it pretty quickly.
He can. He can get on that boat. He can play the Mox, and that'll take him to 5 mana in play and 3 cards in hand. And
well,
the nice thing about figuring out how much mana you might need for your treasure cruise is that when you cast a 1-mana cantrip, it doesn't actually change anything because you spend 1 mana and you get 1 extra card in your graveyard.
Wow. Now, he preordains for the Soul Ring. Now he's definitely...
By preordaining, LSV loses his ability to fire back that Force of Will to defend his treasure cruise.
He'll probably draw a blue card, right?
Well, so it looks like...
Now interesting. Does Eric Force of Will this?
I like Force of Willing it here. Because Efro saw LSV's hand, he knows that there's a reasonable chance that LSV is not trying to bait him. That Gitaxian Probe just did a lot of work for Efro.
Yeah, and what? So you think LSV's preordained? If he holds the preordained back, he can treasure cruise with Force backup?
Right, he can. He would have to play the Mox, but
Wow, Cabal Therapy in Luis's main deck.
Cabal Therapy. I know Matt Murray was working on a Cabal Therapy Monastery Mentor type deck. Um,
Sure.
it's the same synergy that I've been playing with in Legacy with Young Pyromancer. That that you got to throw it out there, and then you can buy it back by sacrificing the token that it generates.
All right. Well, Eric found Gush on top of his library, so that flips both of those Delvers. The Insectile Aberrations are now hitting pretty hard, and Eric gets to fire off this Gush with Pyroblast available to defend it. Luis goes
Right.
for Hardcast Force of Will, but Pyroblast is going to stop that.
There it is, and I bet that LSV wishes that Cabal Therapy were an instant. There's Preordain.
It's a lot of mana for Luis. It's pretty. He's kind of flooded.
He is, and I think I've been spoiled by playing with Delver for a long time that I'm just so used to not getting flooded very often.
Sure. Yeah, Mentor decks do need to play a little bit more mana. I mean, on the one hand, you get to play more mana. Those Moxes trigger the Mentors. But on the other
Right.
hand, you kind of have to put all the Moxes in your deck to get to the 3 for the Mentor and to have them there to trigger the Mentor. So these draws become a little more possible. All right, Luis did
Right.
draw Swords to Plowshares, so trying to take out one of the insects. He's dead here if Eric counters this.
Yeah, it looks like Eric will be able to do this. Insects don't make good farmers, it turns out.
Yeah, he's got Force of Will. He's got Pyroblast ready to defend it. So Delver gets the job done. Eric won the die roll, played 2 Delvers on his first turn off of Mox Sapphire, and very quickly up a game. And you
Yeah.
like the matchup for Eric.
Oh, I do. So I've played a lot of Delver against monks or mentors, and what I found is that the Delver deck is probably going to lose if a monk arrives on the first or second turn. That's just
Sure.
too many monks too quickly. If the monk arrives on the third turn, it's close to even. But if there's not a monk at the end of the third turn for the mentor player, then that player is probably lost because the Delver deck can put up such an aggressive front that a subsequent mentor is not fast enough to stem the bleeding. And I think that the way that you have to play this as the Delver player is to play this extremely aggressively. So play out your Delvers in the first turn. Try to use lightning bolts. Get a lot of value from your lightning bolts, and just be the aggressive player. And that, in my experience, leads to a fairly favorable matchup for the Delver player.
All right, well, let's see what these guys draw this time. Doesn't feel like such a lopsided matchup that, I mean, we're not talking, Belcher versus Shops or Oath versus
Or
Delver.
Belcher versus Delver. No, it's not far from even. I think it's slightly favorable for Delver, but it's close enough, and it's a good matchup with a lot of play on both sides.
Cool. All right, well, Luis's draw has a Remora and a Probe, Treasure Cruise. Yeah, both players keep their 7. Luis is going to lead with the Mystic Remora.
Luis didn't even want to see his hand, so not even interested in the hand. Whatever it is, here comes a fish.
Well, he wants a blue card for Force of Will, right? He got himself into trouble last game by spending his Preordain and then not getting a blue card to pitch to defend Treasure Cruise.
Absolutely. So this is where Remora is pretty powerful.
Yeah,
for LSD.
and I mean, Eric knows that he's got a 1-land draw with a Gitaxian Probe and some Gushes. That Mystic Remora was going to be a major pain in the ass, so he pitches to try to force it, but Luis forces back.
I agree with Ifro not running out Gitaxian Probe there. I draw a card and you draw a card. That's not what anyone wants to do in life.
Not so much.
I like the idea of just F6ing through here and hoping that LSV runs out of ways to feed his fish.
Right. Right. The
Now,
Mystic
what's
Remora
interesting
has
is that LSV has Repeal. Repeal lets you reset the Remora. So that's a devastating tactic that LSV can take. And what Ifro doesn't want to happen is he doesn't want to get to the point where he misses another land drop and has to discard. Because if he does that, then he'll be so far behind that LSV will start to recoup his cards one way or the other.
Yeah,
And,
Luis is now set up to. He's almost got the mana to repeal Remora and play a Mentor. Eric draws Black Lotus.
there's a Black Lotus. So, so one of the tough things to decide if you're, say, a Storm deck is when do you shove all your cards into the fish and hope that something good happens.
Mm-hmm.
But the Delver decks don't really have that option, right? They can't really aggressively shove all their cards out.
Yeah, Eric sees that
So, like,
Luis paid 4 and then failed to play a land, so Eric has to believe that the Remora is probably about to go away. He already discarded Lightning Bolt last turn. He looks like he's going to be discarding again this turn. But the signature card for Luis, Repeal, he even posted on Twitter earlier today that he submitted his decks and they averaged 1.667 repeals apiece. This is a card that he loves the flexibility Repeal gives him in all of the blue decks, which is basically all the decks Luis ever plays. So yeah.
And I think he hit the best possible sequence there of he can play his Remora, drop a Soul Ring, play a land, here comes the Monk. I don't like discarding Lightning Bolt in this matchup. I was talking about how important it is. There's a good chance that were it available to Ifro here, he'd be able to bolt the Monk. But instead, that Monk is probably going to team up with his friend, the Remora.
Well, I think this Remora is going to get Pyroblasted. And
That's
Luis
true.
doesn't
Okay.
really have an answer to that.
No, no. So it looks like, yeah. So it looks like the Monk's going to arrive, and then Ifro's going to try his very best to find a lightning bolt or a similar removal spell.
Yeah, Luis goes Soul Ring, followed by Monastery Mentor. That was the only sequence that could get the Mentor down this turn. And he's got Eric tapped out on 1 land, so Monastery Mentor has arrived.
There
Eric
he
does
is.
not currently have the ability to kill it. If Luis gets to untap, he's going to go on a cruise. He can
Yeah,
potentially.
he can go boating with his friend, the strip mine Eric's 1 land. But
Eric
Ifro has
goes.
some options.
Yeah, Eric
Ifro has
goes
some options.
Young Pyromancer off of Black
Yeah,
Lotus. Gitaxian
right.
Probe is going to get him an elemental token and a card. Still no second land, but he's got a little mana left floating. Preordains into Force of Will.
Which it's not a bad card. I wouldn't call it great, but
It seems
it
pretty solid here. I mean,
it's
this
not
allows
bad.
him to.
He
I
can
mean,
counter.
he's seen Luis's hand. He knows there's a Treasure Cruise and a Source of Plowshares there. That Force of Will allows him to counter his choice of them.
Right, and I think you have to let the Swords to Plowshares happen
Agreed.
because you really don't want this boat to happen to you, and then LSV still has that strip mine,
Yep.
and that
Luis does strip away the volcanic, so Eric's on actual 0 lands here. He's going to be able to stop the Treasure Cruise, but that Mentor may get the job done.
Yeah, that Mentor is going to be fairly large, and so in this game, the Remora condensed the early space of the game. The problem was that um, Eric didn't have a second land drop.
And part of which is because he didn't get to cantrip through his Gitaxian probes and whatnot. But he has now cantripped his way through all that and still doesn't have a second land. So
right.
the top of his deck was definitely Manolite.
And there's Demonic Tutor, which will probably put away the game. I mean, he could probably get Time Walk here, right?
I think he would get Time Walk, and I think Eric has seen enough. So doesn't matter what Luis gets. Eric knows he's basically done. He's got no mana. He can't resolve any of his spells, and that Mentor is just going to beat him up really quickly. So we're going to go to game 3.
All right. Well, a lot of this is going to depend on what happens in the first couple turns. Now, the entire trajectory of that game would have been different if Ifro had a Delver. Turn 1 Delver, and suddenly sitting behind a Remora no longer looks all that exciting. Instead, it's not even a viable strategy.
Right, yeah. Mystic Remora says whenever your opponent plays, is it a non-creature spell or an instant?
Non-creature spell, right.
It's a non-creature spell. So, whenever your opponent plays a non-creature spell, you get to draw a card unless they pay 4 mana. So if
Right,
Eric had just
format.
gone land Delver, then Luis paying cumulative upkeep on the Mr. Kimura wouldn't get him anywhere.
Right, and in fact, if Ifro had had a second land for Young Pyromancer to arrive, then he could have at least started some kind of beatdown. But he couldn't find that second land for the entire duration of the fish, and it just bought LSV so much time that Ifro wasn't advancing his board at all.
Yeah, and then repeal meant that Eric still had to fight the fish the second time through. Waiting it
Right,
out
right.
didn't even get rid of it.
So here it looks like this looks like a
Eric's got
perfectly
turn
reasonable
one
hand from
Pyromancer.
Ifro.
That draw's
It looks
great.
like he's going to be able to have his Pyromancer arrive on turn one, make an elemental friend, and after that he'll have a lot of backup. And LSV has a hand that looks very solid. It becomes explosive if he hits Mox, because then he'll be able to have that dreaded first turn mentor. So this looks really interesting, and I think LSV's hand is a lot better with a Mox. But I guess there are a lot of opening hands that look a lot better if you have a Mox.
Luis is just
Divination won't help very much. It's nice that Divination pitches to Force of Will. Um,
such
and
trolls.
I Divination,
Yes.
not restricted. You can play four
Luis
of them.
is just positioning a picture of divination on top of his hand just to troll us. And
I just, it's a little bit of card advantage. Sometimes, he does like value, and
oh yeah,
Time Walk. While it's a reasonably powerful Magic card, it's not a 2-for-1. Divination is.
whoa! Eric played Island Sapphire. He's
So
leaving up his permission spells instead of the Pyromancer.
interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
I would have played that more aggressively, but I'm not number one ranked in the world, and Ifro is. So let's see
I mean,
how
he
this
does
works
have
out.
both a Spell Pierce and a Flusterstorm.
He does. He does. Neither of them counter Mentor, but they both counter a lot of other things in LSV's deck.
But LSV is getting a lot of information here. That is Luis's Gitaxian Probe on the stack right now, so he's taking stock of what Eric's up to.
So this gives him a lot of information to play around. So LSV has a mental misstep to counter the Piers.
Yeah, I think Eric is interested in playing the Pyromancer with backup, right? Doesn't want to risk getting it Force of Willed, which is probably what would have happened if he'd gone for that turn one Young Pyromancer. Luis probably would have Force of Willed it, and then what does Eric's draw do? It doesn't do anything, right?
That's true. That's true.
I like Eric's line. I mean, I had the same first impression you did of, oh, cool, turn one Pyromancer Gitaxian Probe, off to the races, right? But that doesn't play around any potential Force of Wills.
Yeah, Eric is a patient man. He's displaying a lot of patience here, and I would have run up the turn one Pyromancer, but I'm not sure that my play would have been correct.
Yeah, I like Eric's better. And now Luis is actually in the tank here. He's actually thinking. That doesn't happen very often.
That divination is not going to cast itself. He has to set that up. So one thing that's worth noting is the Spell Pierce in Ifro's deck. Spell Pierce, while a card that you see a lot of in Legacy, is not a card that you see a lot of in Vintage. And I haven't played it in any of my Delver lists in the VSL. But in the metagame as a whole, we're seeing more and more Oath of Druids decks and more Workshop decks. And against both of those decks, Spell Pierce does a lot more than Red Elemental Blast or Flusterstorm.
I'm going to have to apologize to Luis for accusing him of thinking about a play. It turns out they weren't sure if we were on the game and watching. They had just kind of plowed ahead and started the game without getting a cue. So they were waiting for us to catch up, of course.
Okay, well, I'm glad we caught up. So LSV did draw that Mox.
Well, he's preordaining, and yeah, it keeps the Emerald off the preordain, looks like.
Right, so that will allow him to cast Divination next turn. assuming that Ifro doesn't force it.
Funny. All right, here is the young Pyromancer with Spell Pierce and Flusterstorm backup, just like we expected. Luis,
Hmm.
having seen Eric's hand, does not force a Will It. He knows that's not going to work.
Right.
So didn't even have to consider the Force of Will, given what he'd seen with his Gitaxian probe. Now it's Eric's turn to get information about Luis's hand. Really
Gitaxian
interesting
Probe is
game.
doing so much in this match.
Super interesting game.
Absolutely, absolutely. There have been a lot of really interesting choices here. So Ifro has two counters in some combination of things. What's interesting is that while LSV knows about the Pierce and the Flusterstorm, he doesn't know about either force, which
Correct.
means that if LSV goes for that Monk next turn, thinking that he can defend it from Lightning Bolt with his mental misstep, then he could get it countered. And you absolutely have to force his will the Mentor here.
I mean, I
It's too
think
good.
I think it's correct for Luis to go for this mentor. He knows
I
about
think so.
only one counter, and he's got a misstep for the one he knows about. Even if
Right.
Eric has drawn a Force of Will, Luis can both misstep and Force of Will. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
And I
Emerald
think
Tundra Mentor has got to be the line.
absolutely. The other thing is you don't want to fall too far behind to the young Pyromancer.
Right. Now, luckily for Luis, Flusterstorm can't counter a creature.
Right. So
Neither can Spell Pierce.
I'm assuming Ifro will force pitching the Spell Pierce, and then oh, apparently not.
Force is pitching Force of Will. Well, this way he's got both the Pierce and the Flusterstorm available to defend this Force. Now,
Oh, he only has one available now,
well, yeah,
and so Ifro knows that LSV has that he had the mental misstep, but he
wow,
pitched it.
pitched it. Now,
He,
Eric could have Flusterstormed, and Luis knew that Eric could Flusterstorm, but now that the
oh,
misstep is gone, Eric can actually Pierce and hold on to what I think he thinks is the more valuable counter for later. What a crazy sequence.
interesting. So if nothing else, bleeding all of these counters. Oh, and there's Brainstorm, which is it's a powerful card. So the upside of doing that turn for Ifro was that he got to bleed all those counters out of LSV's hand before the monk arrived, and not after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
no, it makes
attacking
sense for him to
cards,
fight. Even if he's going to lose the fight, fighting before the mental resolves is good. You're right. All right,
right?
here's
And
Brainstorm.
that was an incredibly good brainstorm there.
Fetch land, Time Walk. Yeah, those are good cards. Puts back the DAC and the fetch land.
Right. So
Uses the Time Walk,
here's
so making a
here's a time
token.
walk, and the greatest thief in the multiverse is also capable of arriving. Um, so how do you do this attack here if you're Ifro?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, he attacked with the Young Pyro last time because he's totally willing to trade it for the Mentor. I think he's hesitant to trade his elemental tokens for the Mentor. Also, note that if he taps out for DAC, he will not have Flusterstorm mana.
I don't think LSV is capable of casting his card anymore. He's
Dig
not.
through time? Yeah, so he
No.
stole the Mox and can no longer dig. Top decks a Mr. Gamora and just goes for that. What a crazy game.
So the more I play with Doc Faden, the more I like him.
Oh,
There
yeah.
is that. Uh, I mean, we saw that list that LSV played featuring Dak Faden and Grover the Burn Willows, and that list looked awesome. That makes me want to get Grover the Burn Willows to try out. That looks
All right.
really fun.
So Eric uses DAC to find a lightning bolt, which he's pointing at the Monastery Mentor. He knows Luis gets a card off Mystic Remora, but Eric doesn't care. He's got to get rid of the Mentor. This now clears a path where he can attack with all of his elemental tokens, which he does.
Mm-hmm.
Luis is actually down to 7 here, and he's in
Right.
trouble.
He is. He can now dig through time, but is that 7 elemental tokens that Ifro has?
I think it's 6.
Okay, so it's at least enough to put LSV off using fetch lands and Force of Wills, and if Ever draws a Lightning Bolt, that'll be that. This is what I was
Wow.
talking
And
about the
Luis knows about the Flusterstorm, so he knows his dig through time can't resolve.
that's that.
So yeah,
Yeah,
there you go. Match number
that's
one
what I
to
was
Eric
talking
Froehlich.
about in this matchup about the Delver deck wants to be aggressive, and if it's aggressive enough, it can eventually the Mentor decks can do some extremely powerful things, but the Delver decks can put so much pressure on them that they can't build up their defenses.